Eli Warrick counted $47 he did not have on the doctor's kitchen table, and the doctor pushed it back. His boy Sam was burning in the wagon outside. 7 years old. Cheeks gone the color of a struck match. Eli did not beg. He only asked the price again. Quiet. The way a man asks when he already knows. Dr. Prewitt was kind. But Prewitt was bound. He said he could not ride out on credit again. He'd carried the Warricks a full season already, and a doctor who feeds no one soon has nothing to give. And the notice was already nailed to Eli's gatepost. Meridian Land and Trust. 30 days. The bank agent had said it plain, in a room full of waiting people. Sentiment doesn't service a loan, Mr. Warrick. A whole waiting room heard him refused. Then a woman rose from the corner bench. She set down her nurse's bag. "I'll come to the boy," she said. "I don't want your money." She did not say her price, not yet. If you believe love is built with 2 pairs of hands, this story is for you. So before we go on, subscribe and stay with me to the end, because this one earns it. And comment the town you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels tonight. Now, let me take you back to where it starts. Coldwater Bend, Nebraska, the autumn of 1934, the 3rd year of the dust. You have to understand the dust to understand Eli. It was not weather, it was a thief. It came in the night and it took the topsoil off a man's fields, and it carried it 2 states east and dropped it on somebody else's porch. It got into the flour barrel, it got into the wells, it got into the lungs of children, and it settled there, and it waited. Eli Warrick was 38 years old and he looked 50. His hands were the color of the land, cracked at the knuckles, and there was a stoop coming into his shoulders that had no business on a man that age. He worked ground his own father had broken by hand, sod turned 1 furrow at a time back when the century was young. It was not good ground. Dry land never is. But it was his, and it was his father's before him. And a man's name was written on his ground in that country whether the deed said so or not. He had buried his wife on that land. Her name was Ada. She died 3 winters back of a fever that started as nothing, just a chill and a cough, the kind you shrug off. It went to her chest in 2 days, it took her in 5. Eli had held her hand through the last of it, and he had promised her things a man promises in the dark. And then she was gone. And there was a boy of 4 asleep in the next room, who did not yet know the world had a hole in it. He raised that boy alone. 3 years. He learned to braid nothing worth braiding into a child's hair, and to sew a button back on a shirt, and to answer the questions a boy asks about where his mother went. He was not good at any of it. But he did it. Every day, he did it. And now the same fever had come for Sam. It started the same way, a chill, a cough. Eli had sat up the first night telling himself it was the dust, only the dust. Every child in the county coughed. But by the second night the boy was hot to the touch, and by the third his eyes had that glassy shine, and Eli knew. He knew the way you know your own house in the dark. This was the thing that took Ada. It had come back for the rest of them. He did not have money for a doctor. He had $2 and some change in a coffee can, and a note passed due to the bank, and a boy dying in a bed his mother had died in. So he went to the barn, and he took down the good harness. I want you to sit with that a moment, because that harness was the last good thing Eli owned. Leather his father had oiled by lamplight. Brass fittings, worn smooth. It was worth more than anything in the house. And it was the difference, come spring, between plowing his ground and not plowing it. A man without harness in that country is a man on his knees. He carried it 4 miles into Coldwater Bend, and he sold it to the liveryman for $11, which was robbery, and both of them knew it was robbery, and the liveryman could not meet his eye. Eli took the $11 to the mercantile, and he bought 1 bottle of medicine. 1 brown bottle with a paper label. The clerk wrapped it in newspaper, and Eli carried it home against his chest like it was the child himself. It was not enough. The medicine gentled the cough. It did not touch the fever. By the following morning, Sam was worse, and Eli did the only thing left to a man who has already sold his harness. He wrapped the boy in every blanket in the house, and he laid him in the wagon, and he drove into town to the doctor's own kitchen door. Which is where we came in. The $47 he did not have. The doctor pushing it back across the table, gentle, ashamed of his own gentleness. "Eli," Prewitt said, "I would come if I could carry it, you know that. But I've got my own note at that same bank. I ride out on credit one more time this month, and there's no practice left to ride out from. Then who doctors this whole county? You see the bind." Eli saw the bind. That was the cruelty of it. Everyone was decent, and everyone was bound, and the boy was dying inside the arithmetic of it. "Just tell me the price," Eli said again. His voice did not rise. That was the thing people remembered about Eli Warrick. In the worst moment of his life, his voice did not rise. "I'll find it. Tell me the price, and I'll find it." And that was when the woman rose from the corner bench. She'd been sitting there the whole while, waiting her own turn with the doctor, and Eli had not so much as glanced at her. A traveling woman by her clothes. Plain gray dress, worn but mended clean. A hat that had seen a lot of weather. At her feet, a black leather bag with a brass clasp, the kind that means one thing in that country. A nurse's bag. She was maybe 30. Dark hair pulled back plain. She had a face that gave nothing away, and eyes that took everything in, and when she stood the whole small kitchen seemed to turn toward her without meaning to. "I'll come to the boy," she said. "Tonight, I don't want your money." Eli looked at her the way a drowning man looks at a rope he doesn't trust. "I can't pay you either." "I didn't ask you to." She was already reaching for the bag. "Doctor Prewitt knows me. Cora Alden, County District Nurse. I've been 3 months in this district, and I've buried more children than I've saved. And I am sick to death of losing them to a fever a body can break if somebody sits up with it long enough." She looked at him levelly. "Is your wagon out front?" Prewitt was nodding, quick, relieved to have the weight lifted off his own conscience. "She's good, Eli. She's better than good. I'd trust her over half the doctors I trained with." Eli did not move for a second. Pride is a strange thing in a broken man. It goes last, and it goes hardest. Here was help, freely offered, and every nerve in him read it as pity. And pity was the one thing he could not stomach. He had sold his harness so he would not have to take charity, and now a stranger in a corner was offering him the very thing. But the boy was in the wagon. "He's out front," Eli said. They drove the 4 miles back in the falling dark, the nurse in the wagon bed with her hand on the boy's forehead the whole way, saying nothing, only feeling. When they got to the farmhouse, she was out of the wagon before it stopped rolling. She had Sam inside and stripped down to his shift, and a basin of cool water going before Eli had the mare unhitched. "Not cold," she said, when he came in and saw her sponging the boy down and moved to object. "Cold makes him shiver, and shivering makes the fever climb. Cool, steady, you keep the water coming and you keep the fire low and you do not stop, not for a minute, not all night." "Can you do that?" "I can do that." "Then we might keep him." And that was the first night. I have sat with people through long nights, most of you have too. You know how time comes apart in a sick room. There's no clock in it. There's just the next hour, and the one after, and the small, terrible sounds a sick child makes, and the space between breaths where you count and pray the next one comes. Cora Alden did not sleep. She sponged the boy and she dosed him from her own bag, things Eli had no name for, and when the fever spiked past midnight and Sam began to shake and speak to people who weren't there, she did not flinch. She'd seen it before. She talked to Eli low and steady the whole time, telling him what she was doing and why. Not because he needed to know, but because a frightened man does better with a voice in the room. Somewhere in the black hours she looked up and found him staring at the wall. "He's talking to his mother," Eli said. "Sam, just now. He said, 'Mama.'" Cora wrung out the cloth. "Fever brings the dead close," she said. "It doesn't mean anything. It doesn't mean he's going to her." She laid the cloth on the boy's brow. "Where is she?" "Under the cottonwood, west of the barn." A pause. "Same fever. 3 years back." Cora's hands went still for just a moment over the basin. Just a moment. If Eli had been watching her instead of the wall, he might have seen something cross her face and get folded away. But he wasn't watching her. And she folded it away, whatever it was, and went back to the boy. "Then we're not giving this one to it," she said. "Get me more water." By the second night, the fever still had not broken, and Eli had gone somewhere past exhaustion into a kind of stone calm. Cora sent him to lie down twice, and twice he refused. So she stopped sending him and put him to work instead, and that, though neither of them knew it yet, was the beginning of everything. She did not need him to fetch water. She needed him to have something to do with his hands so his mind would not eat him alive. She understood that about grieving men. You'll wonder later how she understood it so well. Late on that second night, the fever broke. It broke the way they do. All at once, the boy sweating through the sheets so fast Cora had to change them twice. And then the terrible heat draining out of him, and his breathing going long and slow and easy. And his color coming back from the color of a struck match to the color of a sleeping child. Cora had her fingers on his wrist. She counted. She counted again. And then she sat back on her heels on the plank floor and let out a breath she seemed to have been holding for 2 days. "There," she said softly. "There you are." Eli stood in the doorway with an empty basin in his hands, and he watched his son sleep like a child, and not like a dying thing. And something came apart in his chest that he had been holding together with baling wire since Ada died. He didn't make a sound. But Cora saw his shoulders go, and she had the grace to look at the boy and not at the father, while a strong man came undone, standing up in his own doorway. When he had himself back, he said, "I owe you my son's life." "You owe me nothing," Cora said. And she said the next part carefully. "Casually, the way you set something down on a table so no one notices you set it down. Though there is a thing you could do for me, if you had a mind to. It would cost you less than money. Name it." She got up off the floor and she smoothed her apron and she looked out the window at the gray coming up over the ruined fields, and she said it looking at that. And not at him. "A woman alone can't hold a district post much longer," she said. "The county's talking already. A single nurse, riding to men's farms, sitting up all night in men's houses. They don't like it. They never like it. Give it another season and they'll find a reason to let me go, and there's no other post in 300 miles for a woman with my training." She paused. "But a married nurse can go where she likes and sit up with whoever needs sitting up with, and no one says a word. A married nurse is respectable." Eli did not understand yet. "You're wanting a husband. I'm wanting a name." She turned from the window. "I'm not asking for a husband, Miss Warrick. I'm asking for an arrangement. You've a boy who will be weak for a month and needs tending you can't do while you work this ground. You've a house with no woman in it and a name that would make me respectable. I've hands that heal and nowhere respectable to use them." She spread those hands, plain, like she was laying cards on a table. "Your name. A roof over me. The boy to tend. That's what I'm asking. Nothing more than that. And I'm offering nothing more than that either, so you needn't worry on that account." It was the strangest proposal a man ever heard, and she made it sound like ordering seed. "You'd marry a stranger," Eli said slowly, "for a name. I'd marry a decent stranger for a place to be useful." She picked up her bag. "I've watched you 2 days now. You sold something to buy that medicine, didn't you? Something you couldn't spare. A man doesn't do that for pity's sake. He does it because that boy is the whole of his world." She clasped the bag shut. "I'll trust a man like that with a roof over my head. That's all the courting I need." And she said it quiet, like it was only about the work. Like it was only ever about the work. Eli should have thought harder about a woman who wanted a name and nothing else. About why a good nurse would flee to the edge of nowhere and hide behind a stranger's name. But he was a man who'd just been handed back his son, and gratitude blinds a person as sure as love does. He looked at the boy sleeping easy for the first time in a week, and he thought about spring and the plowing he couldn't do and watch a sick child both. And the truth of it, though he'd have cut off his hand before he said it aloud, was that the house had been cold for 3 years, and here was a warmth standing in it. "I'd have to think on it," he said. "Think, then," said Cora Alden. "I'll be at the boarding house in town. The fever's broke, but it'll come at him again if he takes a chill, so keep him warm and keep him still, and send for me if his color changes." She put her hat on. "You'll do fine. You did fine tonight." And she walked the 4 miles back into town in the gray dawn, alone, carrying her bag. Because that is what a woman with no place of her own does. Now, if the world were a decent place, Eli Warrick would have had a week to sit and think on that strange proposal in peace, and to watch his boy get his color back, and to make his choice like a free man makes a choice. The world was not a decent place. The world had Harlan Frick in it. Harlan Frick was the field agent for the Meridian Land and Trust, and he was the kind of man the bad years grow like a weed grows in wet ground. He wore a town suit into the country, and he kept his boots clean by never getting down off his porch, and he had a ledger he loved better than any living soul. In the ledger were the names of every farmer in 3 counties who was behind on a note, and the number of days they had left. And Harlan Frick worked that ledger the way a hangman works a rope. Efficiently, without heat. He had a quota of foreclosures to bring in that season, and he meant to bring them in. And it did not trouble his sleep at all. Because he had told himself the thing that men like him always tell themselves, that he was only the instrument, that the debt was the debt. That sentiment doesn't service alone. Eli's note was $214 in arrears. That was the number. $214 on land that had been in the family 40 years, in a season when a whole harvest brought in maybe 80. The math was not survivable, and everyone knew the math was not survivable, and that was rather the point. Meridian did not want the payments. Meridian wanted the land. Land was the one thing that held its worth when the money went to paper, and a foreclosed dryland farm bought at auction for the price of the note was the best trade a bank could make in 1934. So Harlan Frick did not wait a week. 3 days after the fever broke, with Sam sitting up and taking broth, and Eli walking around lighter than he'd been in a year, still turning the nurse's strange proposal over in his mind, Frick chose his moment. And he chose it for maximum effect, because a public foreclosure teaches a lesson to every other man behind on his note who might be tempted to hope. It was a Saturday. Court day. Coldwater Bend on a Saturday was as full as that little town ever got. Wagons along Main Street, farm families in for supplies, the whole county gathered on the courthouse steps to gossip and trade and be among people for 1 day out of the gray week. Eli had come in for flour and to send word to the nurse that the boy was mending. He was standing at the foot of the courthouse steps with his hat in his hand, talking to Doctor Prewitt, when Harlan Frick came up the walk with a hammer and a paper and 2 hired men behind him. "Mr. Warrick," Frick's voice carried. He meant it to carry. "Convenient, finding you here. Saves me the ride." The talk on the steps died down the way talk does when people smell trouble. Frick unrolled the paper. And there on the courthouse steps, before the whole of Main Street, before the flour-buying families and the gossiping women and the men trading horses, Harlan Frick read out the foreclosure notice on the Warrick place in a clear, carrying, unhurried voice. The full sum. The 40 years. The 30 days. He read it like a man reading scripture, and every soul on that street stood and listened, because it was theater, and because every one of them knew it could be their name next Saturday. Eli stood at the bottom of the steps with his hat in his hands, and took it. That was the picture the whole town carried home that day. Eli Warrick, hat in hand, head not bowed but not raised either, taking the public death of his father's farm in front of everyone he knew. And then it got worse. Because there is always a way for it to get worse. Cora Alden came out of the boarding house across the street, drawn by the crowd, and she crossed to see what was happening. And when she understood it, she came and stood beside Eli. Just stood beside him. It was the natural thing, the human thing. You stand beside a man being savaged in public. But this was Coldwater Bend, and everyone had heard by now that the single nurse had spent 2 nights alone in the widower Warrick's house, and here she was standing at his shoulder in front of God and Main Street. And you could hear the whisper go through the crowd like wind through wheat. The unmarried nurse, the widower, 2 nights alone, and now standing together, bold as you please. Eli felt the town's judgment land on both of them at once. He felt it on his skin. His farm dying in public, and the woman who'd saved his son being made cheap in the same breath, in the same crowd, for the sin of decency. It was Cora who answered it, not Eli. Eli was a man raised to take his own beating in silence, but he had no words for a thing done to someone else on his account. Cora had words. Cora had spent her whole life learning to stand in rooms where people whispered about her, though Eli didn't know that yet either. She turned and she looked at the whispering crowd, not down, not away, straight at them. And she said, dry as the fields, loud enough to carry, keep your talk. I'll take his name and a place to be useful. That's more honest than half the marriages on this street, and you all know it. And the whispering stopped. Because there is nothing a gossip fears like a woman who says the thing out loud. Harlan Frick, who did not like his theater, interrupted, rolled up his paper and nailed a copy to the courthouse post with 3 hard strokes of the hammer. 30 days, Mr. Warrick, he said. Sentiment doesn't serve us alone. He'd said it before. He liked the line. He tipped his clean hat to the crowd and walked back to his automobile. And that was Harlan Frick. A man who could ruin your life and comment on the weather in the same minute. Doctor Prewitt walked them both out of that crowd. And Prewitt, God bless him, was a practical man, and he had watched the whole thing, and he had heard what Cora said, and he was tired of a decent nurse being run out of one district after another for the crime of doing her work. You two are going to do this thing, he said, low, when they were clear of the crowd. The arrangement. Whatever it is you cooked up in that sick room, and don't tell me you didn't, because I've seen that look on a practical woman before. He held up a hand before either could speak. I'm not asking your business, I'm telling you what's true. That boy needs tending for a month at least, or the fever comes back and finishes what it started. Cora can't stay under his roof another night unmarried without this town eating her alive. And you, Eli, need a witness this county respects to say what happened here was Christian and not scandal. He looked between them. So you'll marry. This week. For the boy's sake. I'll say the words myself, and I'll stand up in church and vouch for it if I have to. And anyone with a filthy mind can bring it to me directly. Eli looked at Cora. Cora looked at Eli. And it is a strange thing to propose marriage as a business arrangement in a sick room at dawn, and then find yourself agreeing to it 3 days later on a public street, because a foreclosure and a town's dirty mind have made the choice for you. But that is how it happened. That is exactly how it happened. For Sam, Eli said. For the work, Cora said. Both of them swearing it was only that. Both of them believing it too. Which is the part that matters. You cannot fall the way these two were going to fall if you see it coming. They did not see it coming. They thought they were making a bargain. They married that week, in the front room of Doctor Prewitt's house, with Prewitt and his wife for witnesses and Sam wrapped in a quilt on the settee for the only guest that either of them cared about. Cora wore her one good dress, the gray one, mended clean. Eli wore his father's coat. There was no ring. Eli hadn't the money for a ring, and Cora said she'd no use for one. It caught on bandages. Prewitt said the words. They said the words back, and when it was done they shook hands. Shook hands, the two of them, like they'd closed on a sale of grain, and Cora picked up her bag and moved her few things into the house that afternoon. She took the small room off the kitchen. Not his room. That was understood, and neither of them spoke of it, and that was the arrangement. and both of them meant to keep to it. Now here is where the story turns, and here is where I need you to lean in, because everything up to now was the deal. What comes next is the two people who made it, finding out slowly and against their own wills what they'd actually signed. They fell in love working. That's the only way to say it. Not in some parlor, not with flowers, not with pretty words. They fell in love the way people fell in love in that country in that year, over a task that had to be done and no one else to do it. It started with the account books. Cora found them the second day, a shoebox stuffed with 3 years of receipts and dunning letters and figures scratched on the backs of feed bills. And she understood at a glance that Eli Warrick was a fine farmer and a hopeless bookkeeper, and that half his trouble with the bank was not that he owed the money, but that he could not prove what he'd already paid. She was up 2 nights straightening it. She was a woman who did not sleep much, and you'll learn why. And when she was done, she had found $60 in payments Eli had made and never been credited, and a clause in the note itself that gave a delinquent farmer the right to petition for a stay of foreclosure on grounds of demonstrated payment. "It won't save the farm," she told him, spreading the papers on the kitchen table where they could both see. "But it'll slow Frick down. He can't sell out from under you while a petition's filed. It buys weeks, maybe more." Eli looked at the neat columns where there had been chaos, and he looked at this woman who had walked into his life a week ago and already understood his ruin better than he did. And he did not have words. He was not a man of words. So he did the thing he could do. The next morning he took the door off the small room where she slept, the one that had never hung right, and he planed it true and rehung it so it swung clean and latched proper. And he never said a word about it. And neither did she. But she noticed. She noticed everything. It was her curse and her gift. He rebuilt her a sick room. That was the next thing. Sam still needed tending and would for weeks, and the boy's little room was dark and drafty, so Eli moved him to the south room where the light came in, and he built shelves for Cora's things, and he made a proper stand for the basin at the right height so she wouldn't have to stoop. And he did it all without being asked. Working evenings after the field, and Cora came home from her rounds one day to find it finished, and she stood in the doorway a long moment before she said anything. "You measured the stand to my height," she said. "Not yours. You're the one uses it." She didn't answer that. She went in and put her things on the shelves. But that night at supper she filled Sam's cup for him from the stove. A blue enamel cup, chipped at the rim, that had been Ada's and had sat unused in the cupboard for 3 years, and she carried it to the boy each evening after that. Warm milk or broth or medicine, whatever the day called for, and it became a thing, that cup, the way small things become large things in a house. The blue enamel cup at dusk. You'll want to remember that cup. It has a long way yet to travel. Then came the garden, and the garden is where I'll leave you tonight. But not before I tell you what happened in it, because it is the thing that broke the last of the ice between them. Cora had planted a winter garden behind the house, hardy things, turnips and cabbages and winter greens, the kind of food that means the difference between a hard winter and a hungry one. She'd nursed it along through October. And then in the first week of November the wind came up out of the west the way it did in those years, and it brought the dust with it, a rolling brown wall of it. And dust on a young garden is death. It scours the leaves and buries the crowns and salts the ground. They were both in the house when it hit. Cora looked out the window at the brown wall coming, and she did not say a word. She went to the linen chest and she pulled out every sheet in the house, sheets she'd just washed, her own good sheets, the ones that made the beds respectable. And she ran for the garden with her arms full. And here is the thing. Eli did not ask what she was doing. He did not stand in the doorway and tell her it was no use, that you can't fight the dust, that the garden was already lost. He'd have said all of that a month before. Instead, he grabbed the other half of the sheets and he ran out into that howling brown dark right beside her. And the two of them worked in the teeth of the storm, dust in their eyes and their mouths and their lungs, wetting the sheets at the pump and laying them over the rows and weighting them down with stones, row after row, until every plant in that garden was covered, and their 4 hands were raw, and neither of them could see the house 10 feet off. They stumbled back inside, coughing, filthy, soaked, and they stood in the kitchen in the sudden quiet, with the storm screaming against the walls, and they looked at each other, grimed head to foot, gasping, the both of them. And Cora Alden laughed. It came out of her before she could stop it. A real laugh, surprised out of her, the first sound of joy that house had heard in 3 years. And Eli, who had not laughed since Ada died, felt it pull an answer up out of his own chest, rusty and disused, and he laughed too. The two of them standing in the ruin of the day, laughing like fools because they'd saved a garden of turnips from the end of the world. When the storm blew out 2 days later, every row was alive. Buried, bent, but alive. They'd saved it. Together, they'd saved it. That night Sam had a good evening, sitting up strong, and he called Cora by her name for the first time. Not the nurse, not ma'am, but Cora, easy. Like she'd always been there. And later, asleep, they heard him say it again in his dreams, Cora, and Eli looked across the boy's bed at the woman he'd married for a name, and he felt the ground shift under him the way it does exactly once in a life. He didn't have a word for it. He wouldn't let himself have a word for it. She'd said nothing more asked, and nothing more offered, and he was a man who kept a bargain. But here is what neither of them knew. Sitting in that lamplit sick room with a mending boy between them and a saved garden out the window, and 30 days shrinking down on a foreclosure they had no money to pay. Harlan Frick had not forgotten them. A humiliated man never forgets. Cora's stay of foreclosure petition had landed on his desk and stalled his tidy sale, and it had made him look foolish to the men above him in the city, and Harlan Frick did not forgive being made to look foolish. He'd sent a letter that week. To the city Cora Alden had come from, asking, in his careful clerk's hand, exactly why a nurse that good had buried herself at the end of the world and married a broke farmer for his name. And the answer that was coming back on the mail train, the answer about who Cora Alden really was, and what she'd lost, and what a grieving family in that far city had called her that had driven her 300 miles to hide behind a stranger's name, the answer was going to arrive at the worst possible hour. But that's the next part of the story, and you'll want to be here for it. The thing about a secret is it keeps its own schedule. It doesn't ask you what week is good. It comes when it comes. Cora Alden had a secret too, but hers she carried on purpose. 3 mornings after the garden stood back up out of the dust, she rose before Eli. She dressed in the dark. She took down the black leather bag with the brass clasp, and she took something else, a roll of bills, small, folded tight in a stocking at the bottom of that bag, where a woman keeps the thing that lets her leave. She had carried it 300 miles. It was her train fare to the next place. It was her room for a month while she found work. It was the whole width of her escape, rolled up in a sock, and she had guarded it the way you guard the last dry match. She saddled the mare herself. She rode to town before the sun cleared the grain elevator. The Meridian Land and Trust office had a brass grill and a cold floor. A clerk with sleeve garters looked up when the nurse came in. "I'm here about the Warrick note," she said. $214 in arrears. I want to put money against it. The clerk wet his pencil. How much? She set the roll on the counter and she smoothed it flat with her hand. She did not let her fingers shake. That was a thing she knew how to do. Hold her hands still while the rest of her came apart. $60, she said. $60. Most of it. Nearly the whole roll. The train fare and the room and the month, all of it, laid down on a stranger's mortgage. The clerk counted it twice. He wrote her a receipt. He stamped the ledger, and the stamp made a small, flat sound. And that sound was the sound of Cora Alden burning her way out. "That buys him what?" she said. 30 days, the clerk said. Roughly, off the deadline. I'll note the good faith. 30 days. She had bought a farmer she'd known 6 weeks, another 30 days on the land his father broke by hand. She rode home slow. She put the mare up. She came in and started the coffee like it was any morning, and when Eli came down, she did not tell him. She would never tell him. That was the whole point. Because Cora Alden did not know how to be loved. But she knew, down to the bone, how to be useful. And useful you can do in secret. Useful asks nothing back. Here is where the story turns cruel. The letter came for Eli 4 days later, from the trust. His hands were black with harness grease when he opened it on the porch, and he read it twice, and he sat down hard on the step. "Cora," he called. "Cora, come here." She came with a dish towel in her hands. "They've moved the sale date," he said. "Back a month. Says here there's a credit on the account. $60. He looked up at her, and there was something on his face she hadn't seen there before. Not since the fever broke. Hope, raw, embarrassed hope. Must be an old payment. One they lost and found. Bank makes an error in your favor once in 40 years, I guess. "I guess it does," Cora said. And she folded the dish towel very carefully over the porch rail, and she went back inside. Because she did not trust her face. That was the lie she chose. Let him think a clerk's mistake had saved him. A gift with her name on it would be a debt to a proud man, and she would not do that to him. She'd rather he thank a bank than owe a wife. The audience knows what Eli didn't. Remember that. It matters in a minute. The weeks that followed were the good weeks. If this story were kind, it would stop right there. Sam got well the way a boy gets well, all at once and everywhere. One day he was ashape in a bed, and the next he was underfoot, into the flour bin, out at the barn, asking Eli 40 questions before breakfast. Cora filled the blue enamel cup for him every dusk, the chipped one that had been Ada's, cold well water now instead of medicine. And it had turned from a thing of sickness into a thing of ordinary evening. That's how healing goes. The same cup, a different hand, and one day you notice it doesn't hurt to look at. They ate at one table. Eli said the blessing short and rough. Cora passed the bread. And there was a night Eli laid his coat over her shoulders, where she'd fallen asleep in the chair by the sickbed, gone slack from a hard week, and he stood there a long minute in the lamplight, not touching her, just near, a man who kept a bargain, standing at the edge of one, looking over. Then came the day the whole county saw what Eli already knew. It was a barn raising over at the Dellums place, 4 miles east, the kind of gathering where every family for miles brings what they have. Men up on the rafters. A boy named Tull Dellums, maybe 14, lost his footing on the high beam and came down through the scaffolding and landed wrong. The sound his arm made stopped the whole barn. Bone through the sleeve. His mother screaming. Men standing around the way men do. Useless with their hands, waiting for someone to know what to do. Cora was already moving. "Lay him flat," she said. "You, your belt. You, hold his shoulders. Ma'am, I need you to hold his other hand and let him crush it. That's your job, hold tight." She had her sleeves back. She had her fingers on the brake, reading it through the skin the way you'd read words with the light off. Clean break, both bones, no artery. "Sam? No. Someone get me 2 straight laths and strips of that sheeting." She said it right there on the barn floor with 50 men watching. She pulled the arm true. The boy howled once and then went quiet with the relief of it, and she splinted it and slung it and had color back in his face before the doctor could have made it out from town. And when it was done, she sat back on her heels, and she wiped her forehead with the back of her wrist, and she left a streak of the boy's blood there and didn't know it. Nobody was whispering about the widower's nurse now. Old Dellums took his hat off to her. Took it clean off. "Ma'am," he said, "you're worth the whole town of doctors." And Eli Warrick stood at the back of that barn and watched his wife, the wife he'd married for a name, and something in his chest that had been standing still since 3 winters back finally, quietly, started to move. It wasn't gratitude anymore. He knew the shape of gratitude. This was the other thing, the thing he wouldn't let himself have a word for. He should have said it that day. You'll wish he had. Because Harlan Frick's letter to the city had found its way to a house of grief, and the answer was on the mail train. And it came into Coldwater Bend on the same evening Sam Warrick's fever came back. It started at supper. The boy went quiet, pushed his plate. Cora had a hand on his forehead before Eli even looked up, and her face changed, and that was all Eli needed to see. Her face changing was the worst thing in his world now. "It's back," she said. "It's in his chest. Eli, it's the same one. The same one. The winter fever. The one that took Ada 3 years back. Went to her chest in 2 days. Took her in 5. They moved fast, both of them, the way you move when you've done a thing together before. Sick room, steam, the blue cup, cold cloths and the boy shivering hot. They didn't have to speak to know where the other one was. 6 weeks of marriage had made them a pair of hands that knew each other's grip. And that is exactly when the knock came. Harlan Frick stood on the porch with his ledger under his arm and his hat square, and behind him the dark, and in his coat pocket a letter. He was a man who had chosen his hour, and he had chosen it well, and he knew it. "Mr. Warrick," he said. "A word. My boy's sick," Eli said. "Whatever it is, it waits. It doesn't." Frick smiled the small dry smile of a man holding 4 aces. "I think you'll want to hear it before your wife does. Or perhaps I'm wrong. Perhaps she's already told you. About the city. About who she is." Cora had come to the door behind Eli. The lamp was behind her. She went the color of ash. Frick drew out the letter. He read from it in his careful clerk's voice, the voice he'd used on the courthouse steps, the voice that turned people into paper. Cora Alden, formerly of the city, married, 1 child, a boy of 4. He let that land. A boy of 4. Both dead. Winter fever. The same season it went through your county. The husband first. The child 5 days after. He looked up. The family, the husband's people, they had a name for her. Mr. Warrick in their grief. The nurse who couldn't save her own. They put it about the whole quarter. That's what drove her 300 miles. That's the woman living in your house. The porch was very quiet. Somewhere behind them Sam coughed, thin and hard. "So here is the county's position," Frick went on, and now the ledger came out, a marriage entered under false pretense. A woman concealing a scandal to secure a district post, that's fraud. And fraud voids the good faith standing on this note. The extension's rescinded. $214, or what's left of it after your mysterious 60, is due in full. Now, or the land sells inside the week. He closed the book. "Sentiment doesn't serve us alone, Mr. Warrick. I told you that in the spring. You should have listened." And then he did the cruelest thing of all. He tipped his hat to Cora. "Polite, ma'am. My condolences. Truly, on all of it." And he stepped off the porch into the dark and was gone. Eli stood there holding the doorframe. He didn't look at her. That was the thing that broke her, that he couldn't look at her. He was staring out at the black yard where Frick had gone, and his jaw was working, and when he finally spoke his voice came out wrong. "A boy of 4, he said. "You had a boy. Eli, is that why?" He turned then, and his face was a man falling down a well. "Is that why you came to Sam? Is that why you asked for the name and the roof and the boy to tend? Because you buried your own and you needed somebody's boy to, he couldn't finish it. It was too ugly to finish." But she heard it whole. "Did you marry us to bury your grief in my son?" That's what a proud, gutted man says when the ground goes out from under him. He doesn't mean it. He means, "I'm so afraid I could die." But it comes out as a knife. Cora Alden had spent 3 years being pitied and being blamed and being both at once. She had promised herself, on that train, 300 miles of promising, that she would never stand in a doorway and be looked at like that again. So she didn't argue. She didn't weep. She lifted her chin, and she said the only thing her pride had left. "I'll be gone in the morning." And she went to get her bag. Now, here's a thing about this story I want you to hold on to. There are two kinds of leaving. There's the kind where you're running away. And there's the kind where you turn around at the gate. Cora packed the black bag by lamplight, folded the two good dresses, wound the near-empty stocking of bills. Her hands were steady. Her hands were always steady, that was the curse of her. That she could fall apart entirely and her hands would go on setting bones, folding cloth, doing the useful thing while the woman inside them died. She carried the bag down. She stopped at the sickroom door because she could not help it. Sam was worse. She knew it in one look, the way she'd known it at the supper table, the way she'd known it with Ada, with her own boy, with every soul the winter fever ever reached for. The breathing had gone shallow and quick. The lips had a color on them that isn't a color you forget. The crisis was coming, the hour it always came, deep in the night. The hour that had killed her husband and her 4-year-old and Eli's Ada under the cottonwood west of the barn. It was coming for Sam now, tonight, at that same black hour. Eli was at the boy's side already, and he was praying, and he was no use, because a farmer's hands know soil and harness, and they do not know this. Cora stood in the doorway with her bag in her hand and her escape folded inside it, and the whole cold width of the world open in front of her. And she set the bag down. She set it down on the floor by the gate latch of that room, and she never picked it up again. "Move," she said. "Get behind him, sit him up against your chest. He can't breathe lying flat. Now, Eli, I don't care what you think of me. I'm not letting this fever take another boy while I'm standing in the house." And Eli Warrick, the man who an hour ago couldn't look at her, looked at her now like she was the only solid thing left in a flood. And he moved. They fought for Sam through the whole black middle of that night. Steam and cold cloths in turn, her ear to his chest, counting. The blue enamel cup passing between their 4 hands, over and over. A little water at a time between the boy's cracked lips, her hand to Eli's hand to the boy's mouth and back. A circle they made in the lamplight, the chipped blue rim wet 100 times. She talked to Sam low and steady the whole time, calling him back, using his name, using her voice like a rope thrown into deep water. Eli held his son up against his own heart so the boy could pull each thin breath, and he did whatever she said the second she said it, and somewhere in that night the two of them stopped being a farmer and a nurse and a scandal and a debt and became just this, 2 people who would not let go of one end of a child. The worst hour came. The one she knew. The lips went bluer, and the breathing went to almost nothing, and Cora put her whole self into it, working, and she was saying something under her breath that Eli finally made out, and it stopped his heart to hear it. She was saying names, 2 names, a man's name and a little boy's name, over and over, quiet like a prayer, like an apology, like she was fighting Sam's fever and her own dead at the same time. Not this one. Not this one too. Please, not this one too. And the fever broke at dawn. It broke the way it does, all at once, a great shudder, and then the sweat pouring, and the terrible tight breathing suddenly loosening, going deep and slow and even. Sam sagged back into his father, soaked through, and slept. Real sleep. Living sleep. The color came back into his lips like the sun coming up, which is exactly what was happening out the window at the same time. Cora sat back on the floor. She was wrung out to nothing. And she put her face in her wet hands, and she finally cried. 3 years of it. For a husband and a 4-year-old, and every soul the fever ever took from her, cried like the dam of her had gone at last. And Eli, holding his living son, reached over with his free hand and laid it on her shoulder. Just laid it there. And left it. Full light now. The boy asleep and safe between them. Eli got up soft so as not to wake Sam. He went to the cupboard to a drawer he hadn't opened in 3 years, and he took out a folded paper gone soft at the creases. His hand shook holding it. "Ada left this," he said, when she knew. I couldn't read past the first line. 3 years and I couldn't." He looked at Cora on the floor. "You said your names. Out loud. All night. I think I ought to be able to read 4 words of hers." And he read it, out loud, in the dawn, over his sleeping boy. "Don't let the house go cold." That was all it said. 4 words. Don't let the house go cold. Eli folded it back up, and he was weeping now too, openly, a big rough man come all the way apart. "She wasn't telling me to grieve," he said. 3 years I thought she was. I kept it cold on purpose, Cora, like keeping it cold was keeping her. And she was telling me the opposite. She was telling me let somebody light it again." He looked at the woman on the floor of his son's sick room, spent and wet-faced and staying. "You lit it. You've been lighting it since the night you walked in." Cora shook her head, that old flinch. "I couldn't save my own. Neither could I save mine," Eli said. "That's not a name to be shamed by. That's just the fever, and it's bigger than us, and it took who it took." He crossed to her and he knelt down in front of her on the floorboards. "Say them again. You're 2. Say them here where it's safe, and let me hear them, and then let them rest. Because you carried them 300 miles, and you're tired." And she said them. Her husband's name. Her little boy's name. Said them into the dawn light in a house that wasn't cold anymore. And then she let out a long breath. And something that had been standing between them all along. His Ada under the cottonwood. Her 2 under the ground 300 miles east. Something quiet let go of both their sleeves and stepped back and let them be. That was the turn. Everything after is the light coming. But there was still a foreclosure. There was still Harlan Frick and a note come due, and a week to find $200 that did not exist. And there was still a town that thought it knew who Cora Alden was. So this is how it ended. In the same place it started. On the courthouse steps. Word travels in a county. The barn raising had done half of it. 50 men had watched Cora Alden set a boy's arm like it was nothing, and old Dellums had told every soul who'd listen. And Doctor Prewitt did the rest. Prewitt, who was bound by his own banknote and knew exactly what that felt like, and who had vouched for Cora at the wedding, and who did not intend to let Harlan Frick unmake her. The day of the sale, the whole of Main Street came out, same crowd that had stood there in the spring, and watched Frick nail up the notice and read it aloud while a hat-in-hand farmer stood shamed in front of them. Same steps. Same faces. And Frick up on the courthouse porch with his ledger and his stamp. Ready to sell the Warrick place to the highest bid, tidy and scheduled, the way he liked things. Dr. Prewitt climbed the steps first. Uninvited, he turned around and faced the crowd, and he was not a man who made speeches, so it cost him something, and everyone could see it cost him. "Most of you know me," Prewitt said. "Most of you owe me money and I owe the bank more, so we'll skip the pretending. I want to say a thing about the woman half this street's been whispering about." He let his eyes go across them. "That nurse set the Dellum boy's arm so clean he'll pitch hay again by Christmas. That nurse sat 2 nights and broke the Warrick boy's fever when I couldn't ride out on credit and told his father so to his face, my shame, not hers. And I'll tell you one more thing Mr. Frick there would rather I didn't." He turned and looked right at Frick. "That $60 credit the bank found on the Warrick note? The bank didn't find it, she paid it. Cora Alden paid $60 of another man's mortgage out of her own savings, the money she'd kept to leave this county with. And she never told a living soul, including her husband, standing right there, who's learning it the same minute you are." The crowd made a sound. "And Eli Warrick," standing at the bottom of the steps with his hat in his two hands, turned and looked at his wife. And his mouth opened, and nothing came out. $60. The clerk's error. The bank makes a mistake in your favor once in 40 years. She'd stood on the porch and let him thank a bank so he wouldn't have to owe her. His whole face broke open with it. The nurse who couldn't save her own, Prewitt said, quieter now, and the whole street heard the ugliness of it laid bare. That's what a grieving family called her in their worst hour. And Mr. Frick paid good money to drag it 300 miles and hang it on her here. I've been a doctor 40 years. I have lost patients I'd have died to keep. There is no shame in the fever winning. There is only shame in the man who'd use another's grief to close a sale. He nodded. Once. Done. And went back down the steps. Frick's face had gone tight and gray. But he was a man of paper, and paper was still on his side. Moving testimony, he said. It changes nothing. The note is due. $214, less what's paid. Have you got it, Warrick, or don't you? Because the law's the law and sentiment doesn't serve us alone, Eli said. You've said it twice now. I heard you the first time. And Eli Warrick climbed the steps. The proud man. Up onto the same porch where he'd been shamed in the spring. And he turned to face the town that had whispered, and he did the hardest thing a proud man can do, which is stand up in front of everyone who's seen you low. I couldn't pay the doctor, he said, plain, to all of them. You know it, most of you. I sold my father's harness for 1 bottle of medicine. I've been behind and ashamed my whole life, it feels like. And this spring I stood right down there and let this man read out my ruin to your faces. He drew a breath. But you didn't leave it there. Did you? Because they hadn't. That was the thing Frick hadn't scheduled around. A county that had watched a nurse save its boys' arms and its farmers' sons, a county grateful in the quiet way country people are grateful, had passed a hat. Dollar by dollar. Egg money and seed money and $1 folded in a widow's glove. Old Dellums had started it, and it had gone farm to farm all week, and now Eli reached into his coat and brought out what the community had gathered. The last of the note made whole, and he laid it up on the porch rail in front of Harlan Frick. Count it, Eli said. It's all there. My neighbors put it there. On account of my wife. Frick counted it. His hands weren't steady the way Cora's always were. He counted it twice, and there was nothing wrong with it, and the whole street was watching him find nothing wrong with it. And then the paid stamp came down on the meridian note. That small, flat sound. The same sound the clerk's stamp had made when Cora burned her escape, but this time it fell the other way, and it meant the land was Eli's, free, his father's 40 years held and held still. Harlan Frick closed his ledger. He put it under his arm. There was no speech in him now. A man like that has nothing to say when the paper stops being on his side. He came down off that porch, the exact boards where he'd read the ruin of them in the spring. And he came down small, past the whole silent street, and he got in his car, and he drove out of Coldwater Bend, and the dust of him hung a while in the road, and then that settled too. Nobody cheered. It wasn't that kind of moment. It was better than that kind of moment. It was just quiet and true. Eli put the deed in Cora's hands. His hand over hers, both of them holding it, on the steps, in front of everyone. Then he did the last thing. He knelt down. Right there. Down to where Sam stood at his side, the boy well now, wide-eyed, holding his father's coat. Down to the boy's exact height, and he said something to Sam that the front of the crowd heard and passed back. You want her to stay, don't you? And Sam nodded, hard, and grabbed for Cora's skirt. And Eli stood back up. To his full height. In front of the whole town that had whispered, the proud man who mistook every help for pity his whole life. And he paid the last price a proud man can pay. Which is to ask out loud where it can be refused. I married a woman for her name, he said, because I was too broke and too proud to say what I meant. So I'll say it now and let the whole street hear me get it wrong or right." He looked at her. "I can't pay a nurse. I never could. But I can ask my wife to stay. And the whole video, everything. 3 winters and 300 miles and 2 nights of fever and a $60 secret and a boy of 4 under the ground and a boy of 7 pulling at her skirt, all of it came down to one word, and it was hers. And only hers to say." Cora Alden, who had asked only for his name, because being needed felt so much safer than being loved, looked at the man and the boy and the deed and the town. And she found she wasn't afraid of the bigger thing anymore. "Stay," she said. Just that, the same word she'd have said to a leaving, turned all the way around now into a homecoming. "Stay," she said again, softer. And it was to all of them. And it was to none of them. And it was only to him. 1 year on. Spring, the real spring. The one that came after the dust finally let go of the country. The Warrick house has light in the windows in the evening now. You can see it from the road. Smoke going straight up from the chimney on a still night. Which means the house isn't cold. Hasn't been cold since the night a spent woman set her leaving bag down by a sick room door and never picked it up again. Sam Warrick is 8, and he runs everywhere. He does not walk if he can run. He's out in the yard in the long spring light chasing something, a dog or a chicken or just the running itself, and his father stands at the fence with the mended gate latch and watches him and doesn't say a word, because some kinds of full-up don't have words. They tore up the first paper. The marriage of convenience. His name. A roof. The boy to tend. Nothing more asked and nothing more offered. They tore it up and they stood in front of Doctor Prewitt again, in the front room this time, and they married the second time for the only reason worth it, and Prewitt cried and pretended it was his allergies, and everybody let him. And on the windowsill over the kitchen basin, where the evening light comes in gold through the glass, there's a blue enamel cup. Chipped at the rim. It held medicine once, in the worst nights of 2 families. It held cold well water for a mending boy at dusk. It passed 100 times between 4 desperate hands in the black middle of the hour that takes people. Now it holds wildflowers, prairie things, whatever Sam brings in with his fists full and his shoes muddy. It sits in the sun, and it holds flowers, and that is the whole story right there, if you want it in one object, a thing that carried sickness turned into a thing that carries spring. The dust took a lot of people in those years. It didn't take these 3. What saved them wasn't money, in the end. And it wasn't even luck. It was 2 pairs of hands that decided to hold on to the same child and each other in the dark at the worst hour and not let go. Because the hands that heal, it turns out, are the same hands that hold. There was never any difference. It just took a farmer and a nurse and a fever to teach them so. That's the story of Coldwater Bend. Tell me. Comment the town you're watching from tonight. I want to see how far this one traveled.